This morning to share with you a message from God's Word, especially from today's passage, which is among my favorite passages in Scripture. I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but this is one of mine. And the reason that it's one of my favorites is because it's such a bold and gutsy declaration of God's inbreaking. And it comes from such an unlikely source. Mary, an unwed teenager, who, though poor, shamed, and publicly disgraced, has the chutzpah to claim that God's favor was upon her. From henceforth, all generations would call her blessed. Mary's song, I think, is in danger of two things during Advent. Either we skip over it because we'd like to get straight to Jesus, and Mary might be just a little too Catholic for us, or her words become so familiar that they lose their edge. They lose their edge. We think of Christmas carols set amidst serene nativity scenes, festive lights and decorations, and Christmas trees. But Mary's song isn't a Christmas song. It's an Advent song. In the midst of the commercial Christmas fervor that now begins in October, maybe we need Charlie Brown to scream another question. Can anyone tell me what Advent is all about? Historically, churches have observed Advent. They have not celebrated Advent. Advent is a time of preparation, of somber reflection, of watching and waiting for God's promised deliverer. The first Advent, Mary's Advent, was a time of darkness. Israel was again under the heavy yoke of oppression, this time under Roman rule. They were being ruled by a client king, Herod, whose policies of taxation reduced most of Israel's population to a meager subsistence living. Though Herod claimed to be Jewish, the land of Israel was once again filled with pagan idols and shrines. Signs of Rome's domination and their God's abandonment of them. When we think of Advent, our first thought shouldn't be, have a merry little Christmas. But it should be, how long, O Lord? Advent is a season of hiddenness, a time to reflect on hard questions of our faith. Where is the King? Where is God? When will justice come? When will there be peace? These are Mary's questions. And these are our questions. Most of us probably don't associate Christmas songs with a message of protest or a message of resistance. It's hard to imagine that anyone would sing "Deck the Halls" at a protest rally. fair treatment for elves, or Frosty the Snowman at a march on Washington. But we certainly would all recognize the power of singing as a form of protest. "We shall overcome" becomes the cry of the civil rights movement. "Freedom is coming" decries the evils of apartheid South Africa. And in our own tradition, many of the early Anabaptist hymns express protest and themes of their persecution and willingness to be martyred for their faith. When we hear Mary's song with fresh ears, we should recognize that it has a lot more in common with "We Shall Overcome" than it does with "Deck the Halls." In fact, maybe it shouldn't surprise us that Mary's song has actually been banned from public reading because it's so subversive in various times and places. Places like British India, Argentina under the junta, or Guatemala during the 1980s, it was banned from public reading because it was so subversive. Mary's song is a dangerous song. It was dangerous when she had the audacity to sing it 2,000 years ago, and it remains dangerous today. It is a poetic expression of the truth of Advent, the truth of what it was achieved in God's coming. That, as Luke writes in 1:79, "The dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death." Mary's song is powerful because it looks straight into darkness, into corruption, oppression, sin, slavery, violence, death, and proclaims, "My spirit rejoices in God, my liberator." In the same way, then, our observance of Advent must begin by staring into the darkness that's still with us as we wait in this season of Advent for the second coming of Christ, our liberator. We must stare into the darkness of our world and acknowledge it and meet it head on. If we do not, then our own observance of Advent is a cheap and false imitation of Mary's song. So Mary's song is a song of protest, a song of resistance, but I doubt that there are many in this room who would think of Mary as a civil rights leader or a political dissident. And indeed, she certainly doesn't fit the profile of a powerful force for change. In fact, measured by earthly standards, Mary was about the least likely person to go down in history. She was a peasant, probably a young teenager, as young as 13. And when the angel Gabriel appeared to her, she was engaged to Joseph, which was, in Mary's time and place, a much more formal relationship than it is in ours. Under Jewish law, an engaged couple was treated just like husband and wife. And most scandalously of all, Mary was pregnant. As far as her neighbors were concerned, her pregnancy was physical evidence of her adultery. In fact, Joseph was expected to divorce her, at very least. And indeed, if she was found guilty of adultery, she could have been stoned, executed, for her extramarital relationship. Throughout her pregnancy, Mary could have faced public shaming, humiliation, loss of status, loss of livelihood, and possibly loss of life. And in the face of all of that, all of those difficulties that she would have known well, her words to us are, "May it be so. Let it be." Mary consents to God's plan. She begins to carry a cross before her son does. She suffers for her son, the Messiah, before he suffers. Mary was a woman of tremendous faith. In the face of her public shame and ridicule, she proclaims boldly, "My soul magnifies the Lord, for he has noticed me, my servant," or his servant. Indeed, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And in his wisdom, he sent his son to be born to an unwed mother in a backwater town in ancient Palestine. Born of Mary's trust in God, her song of protest and liberation comes from the unlikeliest of places. It comes from the bottom of the heap. And yet Mary proclaims that her son, who came into the lowliest of circumstances, would bring down the powerful from their thrones. Mary, did you you know? Did you know what kind of Messiah was coming? Did you know who your son would grow up to be? If we listen to Mary's song, I think we can answer that question with a resounding yes. Mary knew the Messiah that God had promised. She had an inkling of what kind of Messiah was coming to deliver the people of Israel. In the midst of her powerlessness, Mary sang that her son would bring down the powerful from their thrones. In the midst of her poverty, she sang that the rich would be sent away empty-handed. In the midst of her humble circumstances and in her humble spirit, she sang that the Messiah would scatter the proud. We shall overcome someday. From the bottom of the heap, Mary sang a song of faith in an omnipotent and omnipresent God, whose promises to bring justice and freedom to his people. Within earshot of Herod, that petty tyrant, she sings of the mightiness of God and the strength of his arm that will establish his reign forever and ever. Her song flew in the face of the powers that be by proclaiming the powers that will be. If we read further in the Gospels, we see that the coming of Jesus was big political news. Herod perceived the birth of Jesus as such a political threat that he tried to quell the coming rebellion by ordering the slaughter of all the babies under age 2 in Jerusalem. We are not afraid. No doubt Herod was expecting a mighty king, a ruling conqueror, one who would defeat him in battle or oust him in a violent military coup. But God's power doesn't look like Herod expects. The long-expected Messiah comes not as a savvy political ruler, not as an acclaimed soldier, but as a humble servant. One who exhorts his followers, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. One who does not return insult for insult, but instead calls followers to turn the other cheek. One who dignifies prostitutes, lepers, tax collectors, and sinners, but calls the religious leaders of his day whitewashed tombs. One who rebukes his disciples by saying, anyone who wants to be great among you must become a servant of all. This is the message that was deemed so politically subversive that it earned Jesus the death of a political criminal. And rightfully so. If we think about it, the kind of revolution that Jesus was proclaiming was far more dangerous than one leader overthrowing another leader by military might. Powerful, exploitative leaders overthrow one another all the time, and nothing changes for people like Mary. But the message of Jesus is a much greater threat. It's a much greater threat to a despotic ruler. Jesus comes preaching freedom, preaching equality, preaching good news to the poor, preaching love, preaching forgiveness, and preaching judgment upon all of those exploitative rulers and practices and systems. As Martin Luther King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Jesus comes as light and love to the darkness and hate. Mary's song is a declaration that the Messiah has come to turn the world order upside down. The King of Kings is the Lamb that was slain. The real power is shown in humility. The real victory is shown in weakness. That the everlasting reign of God has been manifested and will be manifested in the perfect and sacrificial love of God. Mary's song declares that God had noticed that he is mindful of those that are powerful, that the powerful and the wealthy and the proud have overlooked, people like Mary. And he's coming to bring them justice and peace. We shall all be free someday. little girl. This is not a song about personal salvation. This is not a song that is content to relegate the Christmas story to a story of personal salvation. It's a song about God's rule and reign over human government, oppressive socioeconomic forces, over differences in class and race, and over all of human history. It's a song of God's faithfulness to his people, which he displays in Jesus Christ. It's a song of comfort to those who suffer under Herod's rule. Christ will topple the leaders from their thrones. It's a song of comfort for those who suffer today. Christ has put all things under his feet, and he's coming again. Mary's song is a song of warning to Herod. His days are numbered. And it's a song of warning to all who follow in Herod's footsteps. Justice is come to a manger in Bethlehem. Justice is coming again. The whole wide world around. Mary's song is a song that probably calls us to reorient our expectations of what Advent is all about. Is Advent about shopping for Christmas presents? Is Advent about baking cookies? Or does Advent call us to join with Mary in standing against the injustice of our own time and proclaiming victory, the victory of Jesus to those who are in darkness? What does Mary's song have to say to Ferguson, Missouri? What does Mary's song have to say to those terrorized by ISIS? What does Mary's song whisper to all those who are exploited and dehumanized by the sex trade? What does it roar to all of those who have laid waste to nations and peoples through warfare? What does the Magnificat have to say to us in Denver as we deal with our epidemic of homelessness? What does it have to say to children in our neighborhood who face hunger? What does the Magnificat have to say to you and to me as we wait in expectation for our coming Messiah? Do we have the chutzpah to proclaim with exuberant joy of Mary, "My soul magnifies the Lord, for he has done great things. Holy is his name"? It is telling that Jesus' first act of public ministry that Luke records is his reading from Isaiah in the temple. In this reading, we hear an echo of Mary's words that she spoke over her son as he grew inside of her. Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim deliverance to the captives and the recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Mary, did you know? Yes, Mary knew. And she preached boldly about what her son came to do. And as Jesus often said, we should go and do likewise. Will you pray with me?